On today's Just Awful story, we're going to talk about a gentleman named Mark Dalton. Now, Mark Dalton, let's just say, had a rough time of it. Losing his wife to cancer, losing his best friend to cancer, losing his job, and ending up on the streets. The streets are not someplace you really want to be forced to live. Some of us are nomadic. Some of us hop trains for a living. Some of us live in a van half the time. And you know what? That's great if that's what your choice is. But when you're forced to be on the streets and learning the code of the streets, that's another entire story. But for Mark Dalton, it wasn't just dealing with that. Things got weird. Like really weird. So here's a short story about Marcus, and you can judge for yourself what you would do in this situation. So here's a little short story about Marcus Dalton, and you can ask yourself, what would I do in this situation?
In the grim underbelly of a city that never sleeps, where broken dreams litter the pavement and the neon lights hide more than they reveal, there are stories so dark they defy explanation. This is the true and utterly terrifying story of Marcus Mark Dalton, a man who lost everything to fate and cancer, only to find himself on the streets, facing horrors beyond his wildest nightmares. What happened to Mark isn't just a tale of despair, it's a journey into a world where the desperate become predators, and the line between survival and damnation is razor thin. It all began in the early months of 2021, when life dealt Mark a series of crushing blows. At 42, he had once been a dedicated husband, a successful project manager, and a pillar of his small community. But cancer is an unyielding enemy. Within a single year, Mark lost his beloved wife, Emily, after a long, painful battle with the disease. As if that tragedy weren't enough, his best friend, James, like a brother to him, succumbed to the same merciless illness shortly after. With his wife and friend gone, Mark's world crumbled further when he was fired from his job and evicted from his home. Left with nothing, he was forced to take refuge on the streets, a place where hope goes to die. At first, Mark tried to cling to what little dignity he had left. He frequented soup kitchens and found solace in small acts of kindness from strangers. But as winter turned to spring, the streets grew colder, not just in temperature but in heart. Survival became a daily battle, and the haunting memories of his lost loved ones became both his curse and his driving force. In the labyrinth of alleys and abandoned buildings, Mark met others who had fallen through society's cracks. Among them was a ragtag group led by a quiet, enigmatic man, known only as Doc. With a disarmingly calm presence and a keen intellect, Doc had gathered a few souls to form a sort of makeshift family. To Mark, their ragged camaraderie offered a temporary reprieve from the crushing loneliness of the streets. They shared stories, food scraps, and sometimes even secrets. But there was something about this group, a subtle undercurrent of tension that Mark couldn't quite put his finger on. Late one humid night, as he huddled around a dying fire with his new acquaintances in an abandoned warehouse, Mark overheard hushed whispers in a language he couldn't understand. The others exchanged glances, their eyes dark with secrets. It was then that Mark began to suspect that not all was as it seemed among these fellow homeless souls. In the following weeks, strange disappearances started to occur. A man known as Ray, whose contagious laughter once filled the nights with hope, vanished without a trace. Another Sandra, a quiet, kind soul, with eyes that spoke of lost dreams, similarly evaporated into the darkness. Rumors began to swirl among the homeless community that there was a predatory force at work, something sinister hidden in plain sight. Mark's instincts, honed by months of hardship, told him that something was deeply wrong. Late one night, after a particularly chilling storm, he followed the sound of muffled voices echoing down a deserted street. His curiosity overcame his fear as he crept toward a flickering street lamp. There, in the shadows of a crumbling storefront, he witnessed a sight that would haunt him forever.
A group of his so-called family gathered in a circle, their eyes glazed over with a feral intensity. At the center lay the lifeless body of a man, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket. But what made Mark's blood run cold wasn't just the body, it was the realization that the group was carefully carving into the flesh, preparing something unthinkable. The next morning, shaken and unable to sleep, Mark confronted Doc. In the early light, with dew on their faces and desperation heavy in the air, Mark demanded answers. Doc's expression remained impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. "Sometimes, Mark," he said slowly, "when you're given nothing, you learn to take what you need." His voice was soft yet chilling, as if reciting a well-rehearsed mantra. Mark's mind reeled as he connected the dots. The whispers he'd heard, the sudden disappearances, the ritualistic scenes, all pointed to one unspeakable truth. The group was not simply a band of lost souls. They had become cannibals, preying on the vulnerable and even on each other, driven by an insatiable hunger that transcended mere starvation. But this was no mindless act of survival. It was methodical, almost ritualistic, a twisted form of penance for the losses they'd suffered. In a place where grief ruled and hope was a rare commodity, the line between human and monster blurred alarmingly. Mark, horrified by the realization, knew he had to get away, but escaping Doc's group would not be easy. They had the streets mapped out like a labyrinth, and their network of informants was vast. Any attempt to leave might be met with swift and brutal retribution. Days turned into a blur of paranoia and quiet terror. Mark began to plot his escape in the dead of night, gathering what little he had and memorizing every twist and turn of the alleys he had come to know so well. He knew he couldn't run in daylight. The streets were watched by those who lurked in the shadows of despair. Instead, he chose to wait until the dead of night, when even the harsh eyes of the city seemed to turn away. One particularly sweltering night, with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional cry of a strayed dog echoing in the darkness, Mark saw his chance. The group had gathered again, this time near an old, decrepit park, where their eerie rituals unfolded. Masked by the cover of darkness, Mark slipped away from the circle, his heart pounding like a war drum in his ears. For what felt like hours, he navigated the maze of back alleys, avoiding the known haunts of Doc's group. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, sent jolts of terror through his body. It wasn't long before he heard heavy footsteps behind him, a reminder that escape was never guaranteed on these unforgiving streets. The chase was relentless. As Mark ran through the labyrinthine streets, the sounds of pursuit echoed in his ears. The sinister murmurs of his former family were close behind, their voices mingling with the pounding of his own heart. In his desperate sprint, Mark stumbled into a narrow side street, the concrete rough against his skin, and he could feel his strength waning. Just when hope seemed to fade, Mark ducked into an old, abandoned building, a relic of better times, its walls now a canvas for decay and despair. Inside, the shadows danced ominously, and the air was thick with the scent of rust and old memories. He moved cautiously, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. Then, amid the darkness, a heavy crash shattered the stillness. Mark froze. The sound had come from above, a floor collapsing under unseen weight. He clutched his side as a searing pain tore through him, and his vision blurred. In that terrible moment, he realized that in his frantic escape, he had been caught by a trap set by his pursuers. When Mark awoke, he was in a dim, flickering room. The scent of antiseptic mixed with something fouler hung in the air. Dazed and disoriented, he tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing he remembered was the crash in the old building. Now, his body felt different. He was missing an arm. Pain radiated from the stump, and he could feel blood trickling down his side. He tried to move, but his captors were nowhere to be seen. The room was empty, except for a single dusty mirror hanging on the wall. In the mirror's reflection, Mark saw not only his own battered form, but also a series of cryptic symbols etched into the walls. They seemed to pulse and shift, as if alive with some ancient power. As the hours passed, Mark's thoughts turned inward. He recalled the words of Doc, the horrifying ritual, and the eerie sense of destiny that had haunted him since his life began to unravel. In that moment, a realization began to dawn on him. Perhaps his suffering was not a random misfortune, but part of something larger, something predestined. Weak and bleeding, Mark forced himself to stand. With trembling hands, he examined the symbols on the wall. They resembled a mixture of ancient runes and modern graffiti, a language that spoke of curses, redemption, and rebirth. The symbols seemed to whisper of an old pact, one that had been made long before Mark had ever set foot on the streets. A voice, soft and distant, echoed in the room. "You have been marked, Mark Dalton. Your pain, your loss, they are the key." The voice was not malevolent, yet it carried a weight that pressed on his soul. It was as if the very walls of the building were speaking to him, urging him to understand his place in this dark tapestry. As Mark pieced together the fragments of his shattered life, he realized that his tragedy, losing his wife, his friend, his home, had not been mere chance. They were part of a cosmic ledger, a balance that had tipped too far into despair, and now his escape, though marred by physical loss, might be his redemption.
It was 1995 when I was homeless. I had a house with a friend, Jim, still know him to this day, but Jim left the house and forgot to tell the landlord that I was going to stick around. So one day, the landlord shows up with a painting crew. I'm crashed out on the couch. I say, "What are you doing here?" He says, "What are you doing here?" And he gave me a couple days to pack up all my stuff into a storage unit, and I lived in a 1983 Toyota Tercel for several months. Funny enough, I was singing for a band and working at nightclubs and doing all kinds of fun stuff on the streets of Detroit, and I would get off of those highs of performing or just being somebody, and I would go back to my car and be humbled quickly. As miserable as I was in that Detroit winter, bundled up under 5 or 6 blankets with the exhaust from the heater probably getting ready to kill me, I'm glad it happened. I learned a lot. And it wasn't the only time that I was homeless. Before that, I was kicked out of my house at 17 for being a shitty kid. Yeah, I know, believe it or not, me, a shitty kid? You know, apparently I was when I was a teenager. There was another time when I just went through a breakup and I decided to live nomadically and just couch surf at a lot of different friends' houses for almost a year. It was, again, very humbling. And I gave up my apartment to go live in a van, which was intentional. And I would do it again, honestly. I love living full-time. Van life is the best. That's not homelessness, though. That's just a home on wheels. Marcus Dalton was homeless. He lost everything. He had no means of supporting himself. Nobody around to help. There's a lot of those people out there. I used to do a TV show called With Sign in Hand about people that we'd just stop and interview on the side of the road, holding signs, help, whatever, homeless, whatever you can do helps. We've seen it all. And we've come to realize that most of those people, and I do say most of them, 3/4 of them wanted to be in the situation they're in. Or they're just straight up bullshitting you. They have a house and that is their job to stand on the corner. I put the host of that show, Garrett Kuhn, love him to death, he's my brother. He wasn't happy with me when we did an episode where I put him on the street with a sign and humbled his ass, as he would put it. It's hard to sit out there and beg. It's really difficult. It really messes with your head. I'm sure he learned a lot. But at the same time, he made $70 and got a ton of snacks from people that at that red light in front of a Walmart that just pulled over and gave him money. And pulled over and gave them food and drinks. So a lot of those people that you see on the side of the road, a lot of them are a collective, they have a house, that's their job. So don't get fooled by them. A lot of them love the freedom, they don't want any responsibilities. A lot of them are drug addicts that are whacked out of their brain. But the people like Marcus Dalton had no plan or need or want or choice in the matter and just ended up on the streets. And the rest of the stuff, if you think it's legit, it could be, it might not be. very good chance it might not be, as the skeptic that I am, but it's a fun story to tell, and I enjoyed reading that short story to you. And every single week, I'm going to do it again. Oh yeah, we're not stopping now. We're not stopping now at all. No, we're going to keep reading these little short stories every single week, and you're going to keep watching. That's why you got to hit the subscribe button right now. I don't mean to point at you. I don't mean to get all aggressive here, okay? You've already been through a lot on this episode. But I'm being stern with you people right now. Subscribe. If you like the video, if you like the story, hit the like button as well. That's great. That helps us out. We're a new channel, you know? But definitely subscribe and hit that little notification bell, the bing, because it'll tell you every time one of these videos is out. Got it? Speaking of out, I'm out of things to say. So like and subscribe. We'll see you in a couple days. We'll see you next week. And don't have a just awful day. Have a wonderful day, okay? I'm Brandon. See you next week.